The moment that changed everything, stop right there, ma'am. The sharp voice echoed across the courthouse parking lot. Turning heads instantly, people froze. A tall police officer stepped forward, one hand resting on his belt, his eyes locked. On a woman walking calmly toward the courthouse entrance, the woman paused. She wore a simple navy blue suit, her posture straight, her expression calm but firm. In her hand was a leather briefcase, and her heels clicked softly against the pavement as she turned to face the officer. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked politely. Officer Daniel Harris frowned slightly. He had been standing outside the courthouse all morning, assigned to security duty. Most people walked past without any issues, but something about this woman made him suspicious. Maybe it was the way she walked confidently toward the private entrance. Maybe it was the fact that he didn't recognize her. Or maybe it was something he didn't even realize himself. "Ma'am, I need you to step aside," Officer Harris said, his tone firm. "This entrance is restricted." The woman looked at the sign above the door, then back at him. "I'm aware," she replied calmly. A few people nearby slowed down, sensing tension. One man whispered to another, "What's going on?" Officer Harris crossed his arms. "Do you have identification?" he asked. The woman blinked once, clearly surprised. "Yes," she said. "But may I ask why you're stopping me?" "Routine security," Harris replied quickly. But the truth was he hadn't stopped anyone else that morning, not a single person. And now, everyone was watching. The morning air felt heavier by the second. People walking into the courthouse began slowing down, pretending to check their phones while secretly watching the scene unfold. The woman opened her briefcase calmly and pulled out a sleek identification card. She held it toward Officer Harris. "Here you go," she said. He took the card quickly, glancing at it without much attention. Then he frowned. His eyebrows slowly pulled together. He read the name again. Honorable Judge Vanessa Coleman. For a split second, his brain didn't process what he was seeing. Judge? That couldn't be right. He looked up at her again. She stood quietly, her expression calm but serious. "You're a judge?" he asked, his voice suddenly uncertain. "Yes," she replied simply. A few people nearby gasped quietly. One woman whispered, "Did he just stop a judge?" Officer Harris felt his throat tighten, but instead of stepping back, he doubled down. "Well, I still need to verify," he said stiffly. Judge Coleman didn't react emotionally. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She simply folded her hands in front of her and waited. And somehow, that calmness made the situation even more uncomfortable. Inside the courthouse lobby, a clerk near the entrance had already noticed the growing crowd outside. She picked up the phone quickly. "This is the front desk," she whispered urgently. "There's a situation outside." Officer Harris stopped Judge Coleman. Silence fell on the other end. "Then what did you say?" Moments later, the courthouse doors burst open. Sergeant Michael Ruiz stepped outside quickly. Scanning the scene, he saw Officer Harris standing stiffly. He saw the crowd gathering, and then he saw Judge Vanessa Coleman. His eyes widened instantly. "No," he muttered under his breath. He rushed forward. "Your Honor." Sergeant Ruiz said quickly, removing his cap. "Good morning." Judge Coleman nodded politely. "Good morning, Sergeant." Ruiz turned sharply toward Officer Harris. "What is going on here?" he demanded. Officer Harris swallowed. "I was conducting routine security," he said defensively. Ruiz lowered his voice but spoke through clenched teeth. "That is Judge Coleman," he whispered sharply. "I know," Harris replied, trying to maintain confidence. "I checked her ID." Ruiz stared at him in disbelief. "And you still stopped her?" Now the crowd was fully watching. Phones were slowly being raised. Someone whispered, "This is going to be trouble." Officer Harris suddenly felt heat rising in his face for the first time. Doubt crept into his mind. Had he made a mistake? A very big one? And this was only the beginning. Judge Coleman took a slow breath. Her voice remained steady, but there was quiet strength behind every word. "Officer Harris," she said, "do you know how many years I worked to stand where I am today?" He shook his head slightly. 23 years, she continued. 23 years of studying, working late nights, missing family dinners, and pushing through obstacles most people never see. The crowd fell completely silent. Even the distant sounds of traffic seemed to fade. "I was told many times that I didn't belong," she added. that someone like me wouldn't make it this far. Her eyes remained locked on his. But I kept going. Officer Harris felt his chest tighten. This wasn't just about an ID check anymore. This was something deeper, something heavier. Judge Coleman continued. When I walk into this courthouse, I don't just represent myself. I represent fairness, justice, and the belief that everyone deserves respect. The man in the crowd slowly lowered his phone, listening carefully now. Sergeant Ruiz stood quietly, letting her speak. And today, she said firmly, I was stopped not because of policy, but because of perception. The word perception echoed in the silence. Officer Harris felt shame creeping into his chest. Not anger, not defensiveness. Shame, because deep down, he knew she was right. Sergeant Ruiz stepped forward. Again. Officer Harris, he said firmly, step aside. Harris obeyed without argument. Ruiz turned back toward Judge Coleman. Your Honor, I will personally file a report regarding this incident, he said. This behavior does not reflect our department's standards. Judge Coleman nodded once. I appreciate that, she replied. Then she turned slightly toward Officer Harris again. For a moment, he expected anger, harsh words, public humiliation. But instead, she spoke calmly. Officer Harris, she said, mistakes happen. But what matters most is what you learn from them. Her words caught him off guard. He looked up slowly. He began, his voice shaky. I'm sorry, Your Honor. The apology sounded small, but sincere. Judge Coleman studied his face carefully. Being in uniform comes with responsibility, she said. Not just to enforce rules, but to treat people fairly. He nodded quickly. Yes, ma'am. Sergeant Ruiz turned to the small crowd gathering nearby. All right, everyone, please keep moving, he announced slowly. People began to disperse, but the impact of the moment lingered. Inside Officer Harris's mind, thoughts raced. He replayed the moment again and again. Why had he stopped her? Why hadn't he stopped others? Questions he didn't want to face, but now couldn't ignore. Later that afternoon, he sat alone in the break room, staring at the floor at the uniform he once wore with pride, now felt heavier than ever, not because of punishment, but because of realization. Several days later, Officer Harris received notice that he was required to attend additional professional training, not suspension, not termination. Training workshops focused on awareness, fairness, and unbiased policing. At first, he felt embarrassed, ashamed, but slowly something changed. During one session, the instructor asked a simple question. Have you ever judged someone before knowing who they truly were? The room stayed silent. Officer Harris thought back to that morning. Judge Coleman, walking calmly, his voice shouting, the crowd watching, and the moment he read her ID, that memory stayed with him. Weeks later, he saw Judge Coleman again. This time, inside the courthouse hallway, she walked past him calmly. He stood straight. Respectful good morning, Your Honor, he said. She paused briefly, looked at him, and gave a small nod. Good morning, officer. There was no anger in her voice. No resentment, just dignity. And that moment meant more to him than any punishment ever could. From that day forward, Officer Harris approached every person differently, more carefully, more respectfully, because he understood something now that he hadn't fully realized before. Authority isn't just about power. It's about responsibility and respect. Isn't something you give based on appearances. It's something every person deserves, no matter who they are, no matter where they come from, no matter how they look. And as Judge Vanessa Coleman walked into her courtroom that day, she carried herself with the same strength she always had. But somewhere behind her, a police officer stood quietly, forever changed by one moment that taught him a lesson he would never forget. Sometimes, the biggest regrets become the most important lessons.